On a sunny April morning, Chicago's financial heart goes dark. Thousands evacuated, commerce frozen, while the streets stay dry. Down below, fish from the river are swimming through the basements of skyscrapers. No storm, no warning, just water rising from nowhere, turning 20 city blocks into a subterranean lagoon. This is not a fluke of nature. It is the result of a mistake that cost $2 billion, rooted in a buried secret the city forgot it owned. How did a telephone company's century-old tunnel scheme become the most expensive disaster in Chicago's modern history? The real flood starts 40 feet beneath your feet, and the story only gets stranger from here. In 1899, the Illinois Telephone and Telegraph Company secured a city permit to run cables beneath Chicago's downtown. The paperwork read like a snooze, just some telephone and telegraph lines, nothing to see here. But the real plan was hiding in plain sight. Instead of a tangle of wires, workers started carving out concrete tunnels big enough to fit a grown man on a locomotive, 7 feet high, 7.5 feet wide, and deep enough to never trouble a city inspector's conscience. The digging began in secret, with the first 16 miles tunneled out from a saloon basement, spoil hauled away under cover of night. By 1905, the network had already reached 26 miles, and by 1914, it snaked for nearly 60 miles beneath the loop, threading right under the feet of bankers, traders, and city hall clerks who had no idea what was moving beneath them. These were not just cable conduits, they were full-blown railroads, 2-foot gauge tracks, electric locomotives, and elevator shafts that could hoist freight cars straight into the basements of department stores and hotels. Coal, mail, even ash from the city's furnaces all zip through this hidden world, bypassing the gridlock up above. The company's dual-purpose scheme meant the tunnels dodged taxes, avoided public scrutiny, and became a secret only a handful of clients and city insiders ever knew existed. For most Chicagoans, the tunnels might as well have been a myth. A century later, the city would pay dearly for forgetting they were ever there. By the 1950s, the Underground Railroad had run out of steam, literally. Trucks took over, freight cars vanished, and the tunnels became a relic nobody wanted to claim. The Chicago Tunnel Company quietly collapsed, leaving behind a 60-mile concrete afterthought, snaking beneath the city's most valuable real estate. Ownership, like responsibility, drifted into a bureaucratic fog. City Hall inherited the tunnels not with a plan, but with a shrug, treating them as oversized cable conduits. No department wanted the job, and nobody got a budget to watch for leaks, cracks, or the slow creep of the Chicago River overhead. Maintenance became an exercise in plausible deniability. Inspections, when they happened at all, were quick peeks at manholes or utility lines, not structural surveys. Information scattered across departments like confetti after a parade. By 1987, even the lone tunnel inspector's job landed on the chopping block, axed in a round of budget cuts. The city's organizational charts grew more tangled, and a reorganization shuffled phone numbers until the only people who remembered the tunnels could not be reached. The tunnels faded from memory, an invisible line item on a ledger nobody checked. When warning signs finally appeared decades later, there was no one left in City Hall with both the authority and the phone extension to do anything about them. In 1991, the Kinzie Street Bridge needed new steel pilings to keep its old bones standing. The city handed the job to Great Lakes Dredge and Dock, a contractor with a knack for getting things done, sometimes a little too efficiently. The plan called for driving piles straight down into the riverbed, but there was a snag. The bridge tender's house sat right where the new piling was supposed to go. "No problem," said the crew. With a quick nod from a city inspector, they shifted the pile just about a foot south, hardly worth a second thought, except for one invisible detail. Beneath the river, exactly where that new piling landed, lay a forgotten tunnel, mapped by no one in living memory. The contractor's hammer sent a steel column plunging into soft clay, nudging right up against the tunnel's concrete arch. Not a direct hit, but close enough to squeeze the earth and crack the tunnel wall. The breach wasn't dramatic. A slow ooze of mud and water, not a geyser. On paper, the change order barely registered. A minor adjustment, a foot here or there, nothing to trigger alarm bells. No updated drawings, no geotechnical review, and certainly no one in the room who remembered the tunnels. The result was a 3-foot wide wound in the tunnel's crown, invisible from the surface, quietly undermining the city's foundation. All it took was a single, off-target piling, approved with a shrug, to set a $2 billion disaster in motion. In January 1992, a cable technician's camcorder caught something that should have stopped the city in its tracks. Daylight peeking through crumbled concrete, muddy water pooling at the tunnel wall, and, just for good measure, 3 wooden pilings poking in from the river. The tape made its way to City Hall, where it was filed somewhere between "not my department" and "let's see if it fixes itself." James McTeague, the city's bridge engineer, didn't need a video to know trouble when he saw it. On March 13th, he walked the tunnel himself, snapped photos of the breach and labelled the situation an emergency. The photos, as fate would have it, sat undeveloped at a Walgreens for days. When McTeague finally delivered his warning, it ricocheted through a city government still reeling from a recent reorganisation. Departments renamed, phone numbers changed, responsibilities blurred. His urgent memo landed on a desk, then another, then nowhere at all. Meanwhile, the cost of a fix became a bureaucratic parlour game. One bid came in at $75,000, another at $10,000 if city workers did the job themselves. The higher figure was dismissed as wasteful, the lower as unrealistic. No decision, just more memos and a repair scheduled for April 14th, one day too late. The city's machinery for solving problems had become so jammed with red tape that by the time anyone agreed to act, the disaster had already slipped through the cracks. At 6 a.m. on April 13th, 1992, the phones in downtown Chicago started ringing. Not with panic, at least not yet, but with confusion. Security guards called in from the merchandise mart, reporting water seeping up through the basement floor. By 7 a.m., the basements of the Board of Trade and the Chicago Tribune were filling with river water, even as the streets above stayed bone dry. Elevator shafts turned into waterfalls. In the sub-basement of Sears Tower, alarms blared and emergency lights flickered as water poured in faster than any pump could handle. Fish from the Chicago River swam through the lower levels of the mart, darting between file cabinets and floating office chairs. By noon, 250 million gallons had surged through the forgotten tunnels, flooding more than 40 feet below the loop. The city's financial heart was paralyzed. Trading floors went silent. The L trains stalled. Police and fire crews started evacuating entire blocks as the water kept rising. Over 15,000 people were forced out: office workers, traders, janitors, and even the city's own emergency teams. Eyewitness broadcaster Larry Langford's voice echoed across the city. It was like the river had come alive underground. Institutions that had once depended on the secret tunnels for coal and freight now found themselves drowning in their own history. The damage tally was growing by the hour, and nobody could say when or if the water would stop. John Kenney Jr. arrived on the scene with a plan that sounded more like a dare than a blueprint. Drill a shaft straight down through the street right above the breach, and plug the hole with a custom-built concrete and steel stopper, quickly dubbed the flood stud. Over the course of 7 relentless days, crews hauled out 65 truckloads of debris and river muck, working round the clock while the city's financial core sat paralyzed. The shaft was drilled, the plug was set, and at last, the river's grip on downtown began to loosen. It took another 19 days to pump out the last of the water. The damage, however, was already done. The final bill landed at $1.95 billion. President Bush signed a federal disaster declaration, unlocking FEMA funds. But for many, the aid felt like a drop in the bucket. As the pumps hummed, the mayor's office scrambled to name culprits. Chief Bridge Engineer John LaPlante and Deputy Director James McTeague, one of the few who had tried to sound the alarm, were both fired for gross negligence. City inspectors who had signed off on the bridge work faced disciplinary hearings. Even the IRS sent a note that flooded businesses still owed their taxes. In the end, the city plugged the hole, but the cost-cutting, the finger-pointing, and the $2 billion price tag proved much harder to drain. Today, Chicago's skyscrapers still sit atop 60 miles of forgotten tunnels, out of sight but not out of risk. All it took was one overlooked detail and a $75,000 shortcut to unleash $2 billion in chaos. In cities, memory isn't just history, it's infrastructure. What are we forgetting beneath our feet?